I'm Jim Check. You're watching Kelowna Now. With me on the phone from Ottawa, Ontario, our nation's capital, Ian Burns, our managing editor. Good morning, Ian.
Good morning, Matt.
Tragedy in Washington this morning. I think that's what we'll start off with.
Yeah, they seem to think that there are no survivors. They haven't outright said that, but I mean, they said that that's what they believe. They believe that all of them have died, unfortunately. I think it's 67 people in total. And right now, what I was watching just now before we started is it's kind of like a bonanza press conference in the White House with Trump, JD Vance, the defense secretary. I think it's the head of the FAA as well, Federal Aviation Authority, I believe that is. And very interesting, I think, is they all seem to be on the same page in somehow obliquely attaching the blame for this crash to DEI and attempts by the Biden administration. So Trump claims to
Is
employ
that
people that aren't intellectually um, all there, let's say.
when you're saying, is that blaming it on the air traffic controllers or blaming it on the pilots or blaming it on who?
He hasn't. This is what's. I mean, this is classic Trump, really, isn't it? But he hasn't actually said. He hasn't presented any evidence. He hasn't blamed anyone in particular, but he's just kind of talked around the issue, and he said things like, air traffic controllers, you got to be smart, you got to be a genius, all that kind of thing,
Hmm.
and then saying that Biden had employed people in such areas that were not intellectually competent in the name of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
They
So
showed.
that's his line, and that I mean, anybody listening to this live now, those are going to be the headlines for the rest of the day, probably. Trump blames Washington crash on DEI, but now
They,
he's saying that he's gonna change it all. And, you're going to have the brain power. That was the term he used. You have to have the brain power to be an air traffic controller.
They show the crash over and over. Well, you can't really. It's at night, and you do see the collision and the fireball with like a regional jet that had. I think some of the people on that plane were part of the U.S. figure skating team as well.
Yeah,
Um,
some of them are Russians too, and Trump mentioned that and sort of apologized to the Russian people or something like that. But he apologized for that, or
have they said
said that he's
whether
sorry that it happened.
have they said whether it was the Black Hawk helicopter that crashed into them, or they crashed into the Black Hawk helicopter? Because it was a Black Hawk military helicopter that was doing training maneuvers.
Yeah, they haven't said that explicitly. They've said we're gonna do a big investigation. But again, classic Trump. He's in so many words. He has said exactly that. He said the passenger plane was doing everything that it should have been doing. It was on the right sort of trajectory,
Hmm.
and then the helicopter seems to have just
So,
gone into it. That's what the president says. But I mean, we're obviously going to have to wait for a proper
well, they have.
investigation before we can learn what the
They
facts
do
are.
have. They do have video, and that is the plane was taking off. Correct. It was at a low altitude.
I think it was. I think it was landing
Was it
actually.
landing? But it was a very low altitude though when it happened.
Yeah, and it was over the Potomac
Yeah.
River. Obviously, it gets a bit chilly in DC in the winter, so it's freezing cold river as well. So I mean,
Yeah.
it's pretty dire in that sense
Well,
as well.
I'm sure they have lots of cameras that have seen it, so they can. And plus, both those aircraft will have black boxes on them, and I'm sure they'll be able to figure this out. So tragedy though for a lot of families. And
Absolutely, and I mean that's the key, isn't it? But already, it's just politics. That's what's happening right now. It's just immediately being converted into a political issue, which seems to happen to everything in
yeah.
our lives right now.
Well, moving on to the big story that's still in Canada is that Trump's pick for commerce says president's tariff threat could be just the beginning because he's saying like if you fix your border, those threats on February 1st go away. But there could be more threats, tariff threats coming in April, right? And that's the bigger part of it. But right now they're saying this 25% tariff has everything to do with the border.
Yeah, pretty much. That's what he and fentanyl. You
Right.
mentioned fentanyl. But I mean, it's hard to say really because this guy. he didn't even really seem to know what he was talking about either,
Mm.
because he was asked like about the other one, um, because they commissioned. I think it was on day one of his presidency, Trump commissioned a study into what he called unfair trade practices um, on the part of Canada and Mexico, and that was kind of like everybody breathed a sigh of relief, didn't they, in Canada? Because it's like, all right, thank God, he just wants to do a study. But this fella Lutnick said that's actually the real thing. That's the beef. That's the sort of meat on the plate, and he thinks that that is going to report back in April, but he didn't really know. But he's saying that that's to do with a lack of, in his words, respect being shown by Canada to the US, and he mentioned what he's mentioned before, which is because he was being asked this question by somebody from Michigan, and he said, "I want cars to be built in Michigan and Ohio, not
Right.
Ontario and Quebec." Basically, so I think the strategy is they basically want to claw or steal, whatever you want to say, the sort of Canadian car industry and put it into those depressed areas of the Great Lakes in the US that voted for Donald Trump to try and show up that coalition, I guess. And also, he mentioned dairy. I mean, that's the dairy thing has been going on now for a long time. They're really, really angry about that, the dairy thing. So, I mean, it seems like they just want Canada to completely cave, and they also want to steal the car industry away from Canada.
Well, I mean, if we can get the border thing put behind us and this 25% tariff out of the way, which it sounds like to me like they're relaxing that threat here, and because like, and the next story here that it's from Holly Doan's Blacklocks, and if you want a good idea is to get that subscription to Holly Doan's Blacklocks. Public Safety Minister David McGuinty was in Washington when an 11th hour bid to avert that tariff war, and he's basically saying we're going to continue to bear down on our border and other measures to be able to deal with some of these problems. And the same as Scott Moe and Daniel Smith are both working on their border really hard to say, like, look, we've done what you've asked. He wants to make it clear that our border is strong and we're making it even stronger. And, they're trying to, like alleviate some of those, whatever allegations that our border is weak. And they're saying they're going to do all they can to make sure our border is strong. So, I mean, that's more positive in my mind anyway.
Yeah, there's a prospect. I mean, it's completely spineless, obviously, on the part of everybody in Canada. Every elected official in Canada has just been cowardly and spineless because, but we have to be, really, don't we? I guess would be the obvious response to that,
Yeah.
because the Americans are such big bullies. But as I've said many times, the real problem, as far as I'm concerned, is on the other side of the border. It's their failure to stop illegal material being brought into Canada, like guns. I mean, that's to me that is the most obvious thing, and that causes God knows how many deaths. How many people die every week because of American guns in Canada. But I think at the minute it's just as usual with Trump. He's just terrified everybody. Everybody's scared. All of them are shaking in their boots, aren't they? So they've just said, "Yes, master, we'll do whatever you ask."
So we
And
are reading some of their
there
comments
you
that are
are.
getting in on our TikTok, and somebody's asking for Chrétien back at the table. Chrétien was fairly tough when he did deal with some of the softwood lumber issues. So so
Yeah,
we
well,
do value your
Chrétien was
comments.
tough.
What's that?
Chrétien was tough. He is tough, isn't he?
Yeah.
He's quite a sort of he's an interesting guy and interesting origins, I think. And
Li-
he's not somebody that you can push around, I think. But
Likely
I
at
don't really think
91.
there's an equivalent now, is there, in the Canadian political scene? I can't think of an equivalent.
Likely at 91, he probably still carries more weight than a lot of people that are stepping up right now, and
Yeah, I think.
including Melanie Jolie, who loves a great photo. She's definitely in there for the photos. She's there with Marco Rubio. She was part of that delegation that went to Washington.
Yeah, an attempt to beg, I guess. I wonder if it worked.
She's
Although
not
there are
wearing.
theories going around that actually the Liberals are trying to egg this on and that they actually want this to happen because they see it as their only hope for election
It's
victory.
an
But I
an
mean, that's
excuse
a bit
to.
of a conspiracy, isn't it?
Yeah, they're saying it's an excuse to delay the election. That's what the mantra they're running with, right? So.
Yeah, I mean that is a conspiracy theory, it must be said. But I mean that they are being accused of it, so it's kind of it's real in that sense, as in it's an accusation.
Tiff Macklin had lots to say about it, though. Again, this is from Holly Doan's Blacklocks. Again, I would say you can go read the full story there on Blacklocks. They do great work. And he's saying a trade war would badly hurt Canadian jobs, investment, and growth. And he said the bank would be basically powerless to do anything about it. The dollar would have a really tough time, and inflation would be one of those things too. And there's some pretty things that are pretty clear. In a case of protracted, significant trade conflict, it would badly hurt economic activity in Canada, and it would be lower, and the growth would be negative. Inflation would be higher, and that's the thing, because we haven't developed other markets, and we have one trade partner that we so rely on. We seem to have forgotten that we should be building pipelines, which is our greatest export is energy. Should be building pipelines to the east and the west, and to carry our natural wealth to our ports.
Yeah, and then the old chestnut of interprovincial trade. I mean, there's a very obvious reason why provinces tend to trade more with the US than they do with their fellow friends in Canada. It's because of the infrastructure. It's the lack of transport. It's too hard and expensive to get stuff from BC to Quebec or something like that.
And the harsh
But
reality,
I mean, we're going to have to figure it out, aren't we?
The harsh reality is that we have trade barriers here and provincial barriers. Like we were just, still fighting with the wine thing. Like it's like we have some interprovincial trade barriers that are just not even related to our infrastructure, just on policy.
Yep. I mean, it's very hard to even believe that that's true, isn't it? It's so crazy. But yeah, it's a big problem, and it potentially worth tens of billions of dollars as well. It's like it's not small fry.
Yeah. In the 5 things you did this morning, 3/4 say bring back Parliament, but do they want a deal with Trump or trigger an election? So there's some debate there whether people want an election. I mean, I think most people want an election, but and we know who doesn't want an election.
Yeah, well, in that graph you can see the bar chart. They actually they pull out the Carney supporters and Freeland supporters, and they're they're very much not in favor of an election, which is odd for the party that presents itself as the primary defender of democracy in Canada.
Yeah, and they don't really want democracy, do they? They want
not if they're going to lose an election. They don't. I mean, come on.
Yeah, there's always a reason not to, right? And then Jagmeet Singh, he just says stuff, right? He's just out there saying stuff to get the microphone.
That's one way to describe his career, isn't it?
What's that?
That's one way to describe his political career. He just says stuff.
I think he does. He just says stuff because he doesn't really think. I mean, you look at the history of what he said. He just says stuff, right? And then when like journalists try to hold him accountable, he just says, "Oh, let's move forward." He doesn't even want to be held accountable at all, as well.
Yeah.
Like, why would you want to be held accountable? I guess is the question he would ask.
Yeah, but I just feel like the NDP, it's kind of, at least under his stewardship, their role is just that, isn't it? Just saying stuff, just kind of unrealistic utterances. I mean, this one in particular is a bit balmy, isn't it? To stop the US, any US firms, that's what it would be, any US companies from bidding on like federal contracts. So that's obviously we get so much from them, don't we? I mean, I don't know where would we get the replacements from? We'd probably end up having to be China for a lot of it, and obviously that wouldn't go down very well.
Yeah, I mean, basically saying let's burn the place to the ground just in spite. But.
Yeah, well, I can get why he's angry. I think all Canadians should be very, very angry with Donald Trump and the Republican Party in general, because they are being obnoxious and vulgar and repugnant. Their behavior is absolutely outrageous. And to think that Howard Lutnick yesterday talked about respect. I mean, he sounds like a mafia boss who's like squeezing somebody and destroying somebody's life and then saying, you just have to show me respect. It's reprehensible behavior. So I get it, but is it necessarily the wisest move for Canada to hit back hard? That's the big question. Obviously, the Americans are being awful. That they should be ashamed of themselves. But is it necessary, or not necessary? Does it benefit us to respond in kind? That's the question you have to ask. And obviously, a lot of people think that that's not the right way. And but Jagmeet Singh seems to think that that's the only way.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody takes what he says seriously either, though. So I mean, he says, if you look through his history of the stuff he says, like, I guess that's the benefit of being not even a challenger for the official opposition. You just say things all the time. No different than the Green Party. They just like they don't have really that much support, and so they just say things that could never ever be economically sound in Canada or any country for that matter.
Yeah, and then sometimes they end up propping up a minority government,
Yeah.
and they get some of their ideas actually implemented, don't they? Which is can be quite interesting when that happens.
Yeah, so another Fraser Institute study saying today in the Financial Post, net zero is not feasible and will be an economic disaster. Yeah, I don't think anybody would say differently, but there are. I'll let you discuss that one. How's that?
Well, this fella here, Ross McKittrick, he's a professor at the University of Guelph, I think, in Ontario, and he's done similar things to this in the past. Actually, I like a number of things of this kind, but this is a new one, so we might as well talk about it. But he's just said the idea that you get to net zero, so that's CO2 emissions. The idea that Canada could get to net zero by 2050, he says that's like the technology doesn't really exist anyway, so it's not really possible. But attempts to get there would result in considerable declines in GDP, 250,000 jobs lost, and also I think he worked it out as an average of like $8,000 per head decline in income as well. So, in other words, he's just highlighting two things that you often hear in opposition to net zero proponents, which are number one, it's not really possible to do it anyway. The technology isn't really good enough in terms of batteries and all the rest of that sort of thing, and carbon capture and all these other ideas. And then number two, doing it will make us lots poorer, noticeably poorer.
Well,
So, it's the two familiar arguments really against net zero.
well, we've seen that over the past 10 years that Canada's GDP per capita has been, even with what we're doing right now, has definitely not helped and suppressed our natural wealth. And that's why we're in the
Yeah.
position we are today. Instead of having other corridors to do our trade, if the United States threatened us, we could say, well, that's fine. We'll sell it to Europe or we'll sell it to Japan. But now we're just, we're in really rough shape because we don't have an alternative.
Yeah. And I suppose the craziest thing of all, I mean, it was already nuts that, like, small countries like Canada, small in terms of population, small in terms of carbon emissions, that they were going to the wall for this. They were going all in on trying to bring down carbon emissions. Like Britain is another example, and some European countries. It was already nuts that they were doing that while India, a country of 1.4 billion people, China, about the same population, were churning out coal-fired power stations willy-nilly, like they were going out of fashion. I mean,
Yeah.
that was already insane, like prima facie mad insanity to even bother to do that. But now we also have the Americans saying farewell to that, you know? So
Yeah.
in that landscape, India, China, and the US all don't really care. In that context, what is the point? What is the point of Canada
Yeah,
even
and like I said,
bothering?
then with that said, then that means Canada would offer up its own population and wealth as a sacrifice for this, while the rest of the nations in the world go ahead and with their economies. And Chinese president has said that he will not do carbon taxes. He will do nothing that will impoverish his people more. He will always put his people first before he does that stuff. So we're in kind of like a spot where we have, for the past 10 years, suppressed our natural wealth for a globalist agenda, I would say, that nobody else seems to want to follow, or the bigger actors don't want to follow.
Yeah, it's just like the dopey, gullible countries in Europe, like Germany and Britain, who think that by doing that they'll get brownie points with the rest of the world, and everybody's going to want to be their friend. In reality, the rest of the world just looks at them and laughs, and also is a little bit sickened that they would be so stupid as to do that, while
And
they, chuck another spade full of coal into the power station.
the German economy definitely used to be a powerhouse, and it's definitely having a lot of issues right now.
Yep, fundamentals just not there any longer since the Ukraine war, really. And obviously, they're still a rich country for the time being, but if the fundamentals aren't there, then that's not going to be the case for forever. Eventually they're going to kind of tumble.
And then our new CEO of CBC saying that, she's worried about the Conservatives winning government and then getting the funding cut off. And we're going to play this clip from her.
Something so fundamental about what makes up Canada. I think the least is to have a good sense of what the implications of that are. It's not just the CBC, right? It's all the people that we deal with, that we support, that we commission content.
If he follows through with his plan to cut all funding for English language CBC, what is plan B?
First of all, the way the corporation is financed at this time, it's a mix of appropriation, so government money, and a revenue, self-generated revenue, what we call advertising revenue, distribution revenue. Okay, so the part that's appropriations, that's government money, is 1.4 billion. That's a lot of money. I understand these are big numbers, but it supports all of what we do. And so $1 billion, considering that he's talking about CBC, the math just doesn't work, because there's not much left for French services. If we are imagining like that we are going to go forward with only French, the math just doesn't work. There's a serious risk that it would in fact cripple not only the English service, but also the French service. So I'm having a difficulty just reconciling all of that. And I think it's normal, because we're at the pre-election stage and maybe the promises are not that fleshed out. So what I'm saying is, let's have a real conversation about how it's going to impact Canadians, Francophones and Anglophones, and Indigenous peoples.
Yeah, and you were saying something that they'd asked her if she would forgo her bonuses, and you have that piece there.
Yeah, she was asked. That's not this interview. She's obviously doing the rounds, trying to, she's trying to get it into the media, and trying to kind of defend the CBC, I suppose. But she said to Canadian press that, although she was asked by Canadian press, will you refuse yourself to take a bonus? Because obviously there's a bit of a scandal under Catherine Tate's, the previous head, under her regime of millions of dollars in bonuses being given to senior staff at the CBC. And she refused. She refused to say that she would refuse. And instead she said, we've commissioned some experts to investigate the bonus situation. And when they get back on that, then we'll have a decision, which, as I said to you earlier, I just find a little bit mad. If you can't make a decision like that without commissioning experts, I mean, what's an expert in bonuses anyway? I don't understand who that person could be.
I guess the question I would have as the journalist, I would say, so are these the same experts that you paid to have the carbon tax, said that it was good for Canada?
Well, I mean, any number of experts that you could laugh at, really, especially over the last 5-6 years, where they've repeatedly made gigantic errors and not been very sheepish about it, not been very apologetic afterwards. I mean, to the point where even the word expert is almost now like it's almost like a term of derision at this point, isn't it? It's no longer a compliment, really. But I also found that funny, the way she's chatting now. It's a little bit awkward, really. I mean, she's like, it's a crown corporation. It's not a private company. It's very much attached to and reliant upon the federal government. And she's she's kind of sticking her nose into politics there. I mean, that's a little bit unseemly, I think, for her to come out and start.
Well, a
It's
lot of
almost like
people,
she's trying to guilt trip Conservative voters or the Conservative Party. It's very odd.
are complaining about the CBC, including a comment we just got that the CBC definitely leans one way, and obviously right now they are threatened by one way, so maybe that'd be a reason to lean one way. But like for the record, we get zero funding from the government, and we believe that no media outlet should be getting funding. They should be completely independent. But we should also have Bill C-18 removed so that we can have our audience back that they've taken away from us, which is basically choking off media in general, including the ones getting the handouts. I mean, when we look at Chorus's stock chart, even with the handouts, their stock chart is plummeted. I can bring up chart after chart after chart how media now, a lot of the legacy media is relying heavily on government handouts, but is still crippled with this Bill C-18. And if you look at Meta's stock chart today, breaking new highs again. Meta hasn't suffered from this ban of Canadian news. The regular citizen has definitely suffered too, as well as it makes our communities less safe when we're trying to get our information on fires and that kind of stuff. So I think a revamp of how media is treated in Canada and a free independent media makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I mean what you said at the beginning there, that's at the center of everything I think to do with CBC. It is basically a partisan entity. It's a liberal with a small L and sometimes with a large L entity. That's its position. It's liberal. It's liberal left. And just listen to her. I mean, watch this full interview or just even the bit that you just played. Listen to the way she speaks. It's like HR speak. It's like therapy speak, you know? She's so obviously of a left-wing persuasion or liberal persuasion, and you don't even have to use those terms. You can even say kind of like establishment persuasion. She's certainly not using the language of, just as an example, Pierre Poilievre, who represents a substantial amount of people in Canada. He doesn't speak like that. He doesn't use terms like that. It's like almost everything that they do at CBC is coded left, liberal, and establishment, and people in Canada don't like that. That's it really, or a substantial amount of people in Canada do not like that. They don't like their state broadcaster to be obviously partisan, and why should they? Who should like that? That's a ridiculous situation to be in.
And this next clip we have here, again, it's Vasi Capellas, one of the better journalists out there with CTV and her Power Play, and there's a clip that we're going to play here that there's some strong words there for this, like Perot government.
But I should be wrought with emotion because we're in this mess because of the fact that the Prime Minister prorogued Parliament, knowing that we were going to be put in a position with the President Trump imposing tariffs. Yet he still prorogued Parliament. I mean, they should have went back to Parliament yesterday. They should be in there discussing this legislation, being able to deal with it. They should have ran their Liberal leadership at the same time, but they didn't do that. They chose to put us into a spin cycle between now and March 9, when they have chosen their leader. And then from there, I don't know where they're going to go. I mean, they could recall Parliament, I suppose. That's one of the things that the Conservatives have said, bring back Parliament and talk about the package now. But I'm going to go back to your question to Tom, which is I totally read into Jagmeet Singh's statement that he's giving himself some room to come to a deal with the next Liberal leader. No question about it. And I'm going to say there are going to be some really ticked off people in this country who are kind of counting on having a general election. And I'm not just saying only Conservatives. I'm talking about general public who are saying, let's turn the page. Let's move on. Let's get somebody in there who's going to negotiate it with respect to the President Trump and move on with the deal instead of having an old, tired, recycled Liberal government in play.
There you go. I think a lot of people would probably echo her thoughts because, like, how do we deal with these threats that threaten our economic stability in Canada without like a clear leader and one voice and a mandate from the public?
Yeah, I mean, we should probably say off the bat that she's a Conservative Party member, and she would obviously say that because they they want to be in government and they expect to win the election, so they want one. I mean, if we're going to be kind of fair, but if we're going to be neutral as well and look at it, I think it's important to recognise that the Trudeau government hasn't properly won an election since 2015. That was when they won an election for real. That's when they had a majority government. They didn't really win 2019 or 2021. They just they didn't get the most votes. I was going to say that's not true. They didn't get the most votes in 2019 or 2021. That was the Conservative Party, but they got the most seats. I mean, it's been a long time now that this government has kind of been dragging along, not really popular. You know, it's a long time to not be a popular government and not really have a majority of support or support of the majority of Canadians. And then the scandal stricken leader and prime minister resigned, and simultaneously Canada faces probably the biggest crisis in decades, you know, the biggest crisis that most people can think of, with the threat of a tariff. You know, in those circumstances, the kind of natural law seems to dictate that there should be an election, you know, and I think people realize that, and a lot of people are kind of they're bemused, they're astonished that this is actually happening, that Parliament is prorogued. MPs aren't even at work. You know, the government isn't really functioning right now because the Liberals are having a leadership contest. And yeah, I think that's the neutral view, and that obviously Lisa Red is she has her own ideas about how things should go, but I think the majority of Canadians, or a good plurality of Canadians, are also disgusted by this situation.
Yeah, it seems very selfish, and that's one of the common themes out there, is that this is one of the most selfish things that Justin Trudeau has done. And he's still on his goodbye tour, like he's a rock star touring the world there on our dime.
Yeah, selling nuclear power expertise to the Poles. That's his latest adventure.
And then you put this one in here. What happens if the UK falls into Muslim fundamentalism? And I think you have a clip here that we're going to play.
Mass migration is an existential threat to the way of life in our country and to Western civilization. And the public, be it in the US or in the UK, have voted time and time again to stop it. The prevailing consensus of how multiculturalism was nothing but a benefit is unraveling at pace, along with many far-left ideologies. Progressive thinking is losing. The re-election of Donald Trump by the American people heralds the potential that this war is winnable. Will this inspire citizens in other nations stuck in this political ideology of the far left to follow suit? More importantly, what will happen in the West if it does not? What will happen if democracy is indeed thwarted by the existing political class? Vice President J.D. Vance said at the National Conservative Conference, at which I also spoke, that the UK was going to be the first Islamist nation with nuclear weapons. I don't think he was entirely joking. Is it an impossibility that 20 years from now, it will be the UK, not China or Russia, that will emerge as the greatest strategic threat to the USA? Born out of a broken relationship and weak leadership. What happens if the UK falls into the hands of Muslim fundamentalism? Our legal system gets substituted by Sharia law, and our nuclear capabilities vest in a regime not dissimilar to that of Iran today. Regardless of whether one thinks this is a realistic outcome, which I do not, should we not have the courage to ask these questions and look at where our country is heading?
Well, you're our UK expert, if we want to use those words, because you are from there. Is this, you think what she says a real threat to the United Kingdom? I know, like, there's a lot of people that have left the UK, lots of people in you know, even our area here from the UK.
Yeah, well, she said that, it was in the clip where she said, I don't think this is going to happen. Her point was more like, it could theoretically happen, and she's worried that people aren't concerned about it enough, basically, that too many people just dismiss it as like a ludicrous idea. But I mean, my sort of take on this is she's not just a randomer. She's not some nobody. She's currently an MP. She served in the previous government, the Conservative government, as the Home Secretary, which is kind of like the number three or number four in the government. Very, very prominent person, political figure. She has been put forward as a potential leader, potential prime minister a number of times. So just to like lay the groundwork there, she isn't just a randomer. So for her to say this is kind of huge, really. It's big news, big thing, big statement to make. It's being ignored by the British media. They're just not even bothering to report on this because I guess they're too afraid that it might inflame tensions or something in England. But I don't know. I mean, the news also came out this week that in Britain, where she used to work, the Home Office, which deals with like immigration things like that, and the police, news came out that they have like a special group within the Home Office for just Muslims, like a Muslim group, and they do all. The reality is, I mean, it would take me too long to explain it all, but in Britain, there's a lot of deference towards Islam and Muslims for a number of reasons that I just don't have time to go into it, but they are shown an extraordinary amount of deference, and that's kind of the Rotherham and all the rest of those scandals that connects to that too. It's like a mixture of I guess people are almost like afraid to be offensive, and they see Muslims as like a group that must be protected. They can't be they can't be insulted or mistreated in any way, and they're always conscious of that, and they're always trying to protect them. But as a consequence of that, it kind of there's not that much scrutiny of Islam, and that's what J.D. Vance said. However long ago that was, a few weeks ago, a couple of months ago, he said that he thinks Britain could be overtaken by Islamists. I mean, realistically, no, I don't think so. Certainly not in 20 years. But basically, her point and JD Vance's point is keep an eye on it, because you can't be you can't be kind of you can't not be vigilant about that, because Islamism, just like sort of fascism or whatever you want to talk about, is an extreme poisonous ideology that can destroy a country. So, keep your eye on it, basically. That's the message that I get from it.
Yeah, we were going to play the clip from J.D. Vance, but there's not really much point to it. You've kind of like laid out everything that he said there as well, so there's no need to play that clip. Let's move on to Ruby Dalla. Like she's coming out and saying things just as Chrystia Freeland is coming out and says she's going to reduce gas prices. So what does that mean? Is she cutting the carbon tax? So Ruby's not getting a lot of airtime, but she's lighting up Twitter and stuff like that for sure. She's got one of the better graphic artists out there working on her campaign for sure. She wants to get Canada's economy moving again. Chrystia Freeland yesterday came out with a position statement. Some of the things that she was talking about too are completely different from what they've been running the country with, the past 10 years. It's kind of like, it seems like a lot of these people are now conservatives, but still running under the Liberal flag.
Well, that's probably going to make Pierre Poilievre very happy, isn't it? It's a number of things that they've conceded on, like basically the carbon tax, the
Not
GST
Carney,
thing, and
Mark Carney has not conceded on that carbon tax.
Well, yeah, I guess not. But the broader thing is the economy. Like they've put the economy first now, which was like Pierre Poilievre's entire shtick is economy, economy, economy all the time. Everything's the economy, and the Liberals missed the boat on that, didn't they? Because they weren't putting the economy first. They were putting like social issues and climate change and things like that ahead of the economy, and they were caught by the Tories. And now they're trying to rewind and say, "Oh no, we're also the economy."
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
it's the old saying, "It's the economy, stupid." And like that, I think that's what hurt Kamala Harris's campaign in the U.S. She didn't address the economy enough. And Mark Carney has said that he's going to have the greatest economy in the G7, but also climate change is part of that agenda still. And just those two things contradict each other, especially when you consider
certainly if the United States.
What's that?
Yeah. Certainly, if the United States under Trump is not going to bother with climate targets and withdrawn from the Paris deal and all the rest of it, if the Americans go gung ho for growth, then no, Mark Carney. There's no way that Canada's going to be the fastest growing economy in the G7. It's just not going to happen, because that's like trying to win a race, with your shoelaces tied together or something. You're obviously not going to do it. Not if you're going up against, even if you're going up against Donald Trump doing the 100-meter sprint, he's still going to beat you.
Yeah, or I think in a better analogy is we're going to race in a sports car, and we're going to say we're going to run barefoot on foot, and we're going to win.
Yep.
Somebody's commented and said, "Are we on the radio?" We're not on the radio. If somebody gave us even like what 1% of the CBC budget, we would be on the radio. We did try Kelowna Now Live Radio too, but we are live on X, we are live on TikTok, and we are live on YouTube. And this story goes into Kelowna Now later in the day, and it ends up on LinkedIn as well. So you can find us in a whole bunch of different places, but we are not on the radio. These polls, same area poll, and then look at the differences in the polls. But there's a polling, like this Ecos is putting out that the Liberals have rebounded dramatically, and I think it's on one of the Twitter accounts, Canada Polling or whatever, and that he's flipped completely, and he's cheering it on actually. So you can obviously tell that he's not actually a pollster; he's more of a pundit for it.
Well, Ecos. They're always less inclined to give the Tories a big lead. I mean, just on that same day, so that poll came out on, I believe, the 25th of January. Yeah, on that same day, Leger released a poll which had the Tories 18 points ahead nationally. So that Ecos poll said the Tories were 3 points ahead, which is that's shocking to me. I mean, that's mad. That's a real dramatic decline for the Tories there. But then, Leger and also Nanos the day before, Nanos put the Tories 17 points ahead. So, I mean, that's what people who follow polls, that tends to be what they do. They collect them all the different polls, and then they just put it onto they chart it on a graph. And you put that on a graph, Ecos is an anomaly where it doesn't follow the line, I can't remember what they call that line, but it doesn't follow the basic line of what everyone else is saying. So it is an outrider.
I mean, there is a lawsuit that was supposedly going to be done for a pollster that was supposed to be one of the more reputable pollsters, for one of those swing states there, and said that poll was manipulated for the benefit of the Democratic Party. So it'll be interesting to see where that kind of ends up.
Yeah, well, polls, I've thought for a long time that polls they're not really there to just give us an indication of the nature of reality and the truth of what's happening. I feel like they're a lot more about influencing events. They're about influence, basically. And polls change everything. Look at BC. We've had this conversation before, but look at the BC election. As the polls started to show that the BC Conservatives were becoming more and more of a threat to the NDP, the NDP started to back off on loads of its least popular policies, like the carbon tax, forcing people into mental health care, and all of these policies. They just dropped them one by one, and it sort of happened. You could have a graph again, a beautiful graph, as Donald Trump would say, and it would show as the Conservatives increased in the polls, so the NDP went further and further towards the center. It's like they influence events in the present. Then they don't tell you anything about what's going to happen in the future. Or not much anyway. They influence what's happening now. That's how I understand them anyway.
And it was the demise of the BC United Party. I mean, it was Kevin Falcon that threw in the towel there. And that had a lot to do with polls, right? Like they kept falling,
absolutely,
kept rising, and then it was those polls that did that to the BC United Party.
Yeah, it became impossible for him to ignore that, and even the discourse between the MPs, the MLAs, and all of the officials in the BC United Party, they kept talking about the polls all the time. And then that's when you got the defections. It was usually a few days or a week after the latest poll. That's when they would defect. So polls, they're not these harmless, nerdy little pursuits. they actually have a profound influence on how things develop. And I don't know. I mean, I'm not really sure what ECOS are thinking here, but certainly that poll is going to really encourage liberals, isn't it? If you want to, I'm not saying that ECOS have got an agenda or anything like that, but what are the possible consequences of this poll's release? I mean, primarily, it's the liberals are going to take encouragement. It's going to encourage like volunteers and people like that to devote their time. It's going to encourage donors to give money to the Liberal Party because they think, all right, they have a chance. And then last of all, it's potentially going to encourage voters to say, all right, the Liberals are they're still here. Like maybe I will vote for them after all. So
I think for the front runner,
sorry.
Mark Carney, he would attribute a lot of that to himself, and then that would probably, position him as like the front runner in that Liberal leadership race.
Yeah, definitely. And that's what there are separate polls that show that too, aren't there? That Carney's the boy, and he's the one. He's the one that would bring in the best numbers for the Liberals.
When's that next installment due? Because it was $50,000 they had to put down to be in this first part of the leg, and then there's a few other tranches that are due, and until they get to the 350,000, which is, I think, really high to become considered a leader in the Liberal Party. But it'll be interesting to see how many still stick it out to the end there. What's going to be left when the actual, Liberal leadership election day is, or selection day.
Yeah, they really kind of. It's like a ratchet effect, isn't it? Where you have to, with the money, it's almost like a loan shark arrangement, isn't it? Where you just have to. It keeps getting harder and harder to pay, but we'll see.
I have to give credit to Chrystia Freeland. She's actually trying to get out her message through the media, though, which is more than she's done in the past 10 years, right? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then I'm a fan, but I'm just saying that you got to give credit where credit's due. She's actually trying to get it out there. Mark Carney still tries to evade any like real questions about policy and stuff like that. I haven't seen a sit-down interview with Mark Carney other than the Jon Stewart one, where he's basically saying that like Canadian media doesn't get a chance to interview him, but like he'll go down and do an interview with Jon Stewart. I mean, he hasn't lived here in the past 11 years either.
Yeah, that's gonna, he's being treated with kid gloves at the minute because his opponents are his fellow party members at the minute. So he's not really being scrutinized. And the Tories, I think, are kind of trying to keep their powder dry for the actual election. That's when they're going to want to unload on Carney. So he's in this weird situation where he's not really being attacked that sort of vigorously. But I mean, yeah, with Chrystia Freeland doing more media stuff, again, to go back to polls, the reason she's doing that is because she's like the underdog.
Yeah.
The polls tell us so, the polling wizards tell us that she's the underdog, and therefore she's acting like it. Whereas Carney is the man ahead, so he's acting like that too. He doesn't want to give ground needlessly. He just wants to get to the victory as smoothly as possible. So he doesn't want to like trip up.
Yeah, just like when the BC election was going on, we had access to John Rustad and Kevin Falcon on like, I don't know how many times we interviewed them, like many times, right? When they needed us.
Yeah.
And now it's tough to get an interview. And then we did get an interview with Premier Eby as well. But they seem to be, once they have where they need to be, that they kind of like, shut off access. And, as much as people do not like Donald Trump, I do like that they're stepping to the podium on a daily basis, like all of them are. You know what I mean? Like I've seen Kristi Noem, I've seen J.D. Vance, and I've seen Trump himself, who loves the podium. And all of their people that have been confirmed are definitely at the microphones. And that should be like that here in Canada as well. And our media shouldn't be selecting just certain people to the microphone, right? Like if you're doing an interview with Chrystia Freeland, where's the interview with Ruby Dalla and the rest of them? And we've asked for interviews as well. We've asked for some interviews, so it'll be interesting to see if anybody will give us the time of day.
Yeah. No, I think it's very important for the media to speak to everyone. And that's what, we often toot our own horn about our coverage of the BC election last year. But one of the things that made it so good, in my unbiased opinion, is that we gave time to everybody, and we spoke to we had to like try and hunt down the NDP candidates, didn't we? That some of the paper candidates are just impossible to find, but we still tried. And like the Greens and everything, like we had a good couple of chats with the Green fella in Kelowna. Like we really took it very seriously. And in the past as well, we've always spoken to like independent candidates, and during the council elections, like anybody that puts their name down, we're going to speak to them because that's kind of how it should work. Everybody should get a fair hearing.
Yeah, I would say that we had the best BC election coverage of a small independent media outlet. We interviewed every leader. We interviewed Sonia Furstenau of the Green Party. We interviewed David Eby. We interviewed Rustad and Falcon numerous times, and all the candidates here in our area, other the ones that wouldn't speak. Like that's still an issue. And like you said, we'll interview the independents. We did interview the independents as well. We believe that people deserve that same access to time, and it's strange that our leaders, especially, we've had Justin Trudeau in town a few times, and we've been told one time that we could attend, but we only could take photos, don't dare ask a question. And the other time they tried to not even let us in. We had to kind of like get information from a city councilor so that we could kind of get in there and then have them force us to push us out, but they kind of let us in. But again, the access is not provided.
Yeah, and that's not just a conspiracy against us when it comes to Trudeau. I mean, a lot of outlets have complained about that, and a lot of people in Ottawa, a lot of MPs have also mentioned that the sort of the PMO, it has this tight grip on Trudeau, and they have like very cushy relationships with some media outlets, and then they just completely ignore other ones because they just don't like them. I mean, it's one of the from the media angle, it's one of the main criticisms of Trudeau, actually.
Yeah. So another question from somebody watching here on TikTok is that yes, we are live every weekday, Monday through Friday, and it's around the 9 o'clock mark. So it's not a set time, but we try to go in the morning. Sometimes things get in the way, but we're definitely live every day. Sometimes a bit later, but we usually about an hour, Monday through Friday. And it's always available for viewing afterwards. It'll be on our X account. It'll be on KelownaNow.com. It'll be on our YouTube channel. So you can, if you don't catch it live, you can definitely catch it after the fact. And definitely, the comments are appreciated. Let's move on to markets. Gold looks like it wants to challenge that $2,800 mark this morning. It's shooting its way up there. Not much to say other than that, but it's been chopping around there for sure. It's been like that for a while. It looks like it might challenge that mark today. It's at actually right now at 27.95. So depending on which futures contract you look at, it is actually over 2,800 in the other futures contract, but the one that we're tracking here. Again, if you look at the year-to-date chart, or a yearly chart here, like it looks like it wants to break above that line right there. That's the resistance line right now, right? That $2,800 mark. And then Bitcoin.
Sorry, just to go back to gold there, mate. What caused that massive shoot from March? Because that is a huge increase, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's just all the kind of like the turmoil, the geopolitical stuff going on in the world, and Chinese are still buying gold. Like China and Russia are buyers, and central banks are buyers of gold. I think when the United States weaponized the U.S. dollar, that really pushed a lot of people into considering gold as a reserve asset, right? Like that weaponization of the U.S. dollar with those sanctions on Russia and the SWIFT system really hurt the U.S. dollar. And that's what Trump's arguing about too, because the BRIC nations say they want to break free of gold, of the U.S. dollar, and that's one of his big things that he's going to use that as a weapon too. If anybody that tries to break free of the U.S. dollar as a reserve currency, he's going to punish them with tariffs. So he's using that sword Excalibur all over the place, right? Like, and that's like he's starting these things, and they have a position of might, but you got to be careful that you don't start too many battles, right? And
yeah, especially when it comes to the USD. I mean, that's like their secret weapon, isn't it? In so many ways.
It is. They can export inflation with that. That is the big deal, right? But I think one of the biggest stumbles of the Biden Harris administration was definitely the weaponization of the U.S. dollar, because it put a lot of countries on notice. Just like, why am I holding all these U.S. dollars if they can just basically take them away with a click of a button? You know what I mean? Like if you have trillions of dollars sitting in U.S. reserve assets, and the U.S. government just says that you can't, operate in the SWIFT system, which is where, buying your oil and all that, the petrodollar, and they take it away from you, it's basically they've emptied your bank account. So then why would you hold it, right? So that's what's forced a lot of central banks into increasing their gold reserves, right? And then, the UK was holding a lot of gold reserves for a lot of other countries, and they've been asking for their gold reserves back, and just not sure what was left in the basement of Buckingham Palace there.
Yeah. If there even is any in there.
Yeah. If all the princes have ran off with their share. Bitcoin, definitely, again, the wind in its sails. Bitcoin, again, it seems to have made a pretty good base in the $100,000 market, and looking for a catalyst to go higher for sure. That's the big thing, right? So it seems to be holding that. You look at that chart now, it did make that higher high, right, kind of thing. So so where we were looking at like lower lows, that's kind of reversed now. So again, that base looks pretty good. That's a year chart there. So Bitcoin looking, again, still strong, and an administration looking very favorable to Bitcoin. And then another country, I think the Czech Republic, announced that it will consider putting Bitcoin as a currency reserve. So if it gets currency reserve status, this thing could go, way higher. I think there's a couple of small countries like El Salvador that have it as a currency reserve, but anyway, that doesn't matter, right? That's like Canada saying that it would make Bitcoin a reserve status. I mean, Canada doesn't even have any gold reserves. Like Canada sells Canadian bonds in U.S. denominations. That's how much faith we have in our own U.S. dollar or Canadian dollar.
Yeah, and yet, in terms of like natural resources, some of the largest gold reserves in the world.
Yeah, and some of the best miners,
underground.
Some of the best technology. Some of and it's again this liberal government that suppressed our natural wealth. Canada should be one of the richest nations in the world. Like the people should be enjoying all kinds of wealth. We should have the most modern hospitals, some of the best doctors. All that stuff should be the wealth of Canadians, but it is not, because of we're catering to some agenda that does not serve Canadians. There you go. Canadian dollar. There's our stock chart right there. That is the stock chart of Canada.
Yeah, it looks like a fun roller coaster, but
so it's,
not so fun if that's your currency.
I mean, hopefully we get an election, and then if we get an election and we get a clear mandate and a pro-resource government, that thing will bounce hard, and it'll go back up very, very quickly, and because our GDP would be tied to our resources, right? So it would be dramatic. Or we can do more of the same, and we can watch this thing fall into the dust. There you go. Experts say.
Always follow the experts.
Elon Musk says Tesla might start delivering Optimus units to other companies in the second half of 2026. This is the age of the robot, for sure. This is what's coming. He also announced that full self-drive will begin in Austin, Texas in June. So that'll be cyber cabs driving around Austin, Texas by themselves. We showed you the clip yesterday of them coming out of the factory on their own. But their launch date for full self-drive is apparently June, and in Austin, Texas. Interesting.
That's quite a cool place to do it, isn't it? Because they've kind of moved a lot of their their offices or whatever, factories to Austin, haven't they?
Tesla's not the only one that's moved to Texas. A lot of Californians have moved to Texas, and Florida. Joe Rogan has moved to Texas as well. A lot of Hollywood stars have moved to Texas, and Governor Abbott definitely on the receiving end of a lot of influx of some big companies, including SpaceX, Tesla, and a bunch of other. I know quite a few people big companies that have moved to Texas.
Meta as well. They're moving their moderation department there, aren't they?
Oh yeah, you want to talk about Meta? Mark Zuckerberg settled with Donald Trump, who was suing him for deplatforming him. You know, the first time ever that a president of the United States has been deplatformed by Meta. And he settled for $25 million. So that's a few outlets now have now settled with Trump. He's just cashing in on all these. I think ABC News coughed up some money, and then it's $25 million from Meta. And Mark Zuckerberg, you know, now a regular at Mar-a-Lago and wanting to be at the table. But again, Meta stock tearing up the charts as well. Meta stock, I think it was in the 600 plus mark today. Definitely not suffering from the Canadian Online News Act, the ban of news on, you know, they thought that would hurt Meta. Does not seem to be affecting them one bit.
Yeah, bit of a misjudgment that, wasn't it? To think that you could defeat a company that has a higher market cap than most countries.
Do you know where, if we could have access to these liberal leading policies that they've done, like Bill C-18, and where they stand with them today, but you can't get access to them, right? So they're, you know, you get a couple of talking minutes in some of these, you know, instead of like saying, what's your plan? Like, here's all the failures, and you can't tell me that media has not been a failure in Canada. Look at the stock charts. That shows you the real truth of what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
In our EV section, Dan McTeague, we talked about the other day, and he says it's falling apart as predicted. Volkswagen cancels all electric ID7 for Canada and the US, originally set for summer 2024. The EV sedan won't be making the trip after all. So Volkswagen in big trouble in Europe as well.
Yeah, but Doug Ford just today, because obviously he's called an election, he said that he's still going to go ahead, or he still wants to go ahead with a gigantic investment in, I think it was Stellantis, and that was Volkswagen, actually, wasn't it? It was Volkswagen and Stellantis that deal with the federal government.
Leaving, so I don't know how you're going to convince them to come back. So Yeah.
But he said he's still all in, Dougie.
It's funny, like the EV leader in the world, and it's no different than the Biden-Harris administration when they said they had the big EV summit in Washington there, and they didn't invite Tesla because obviously of politics. And this is before he even supported Trump. They didn't invite him, and they invited GM there with Mary Barra, the CEO, and said that GM is leading the EV transformation. And it's like, what? Yeah. Anyway.
Like Biden was, in many ways, he still sort of perceived himself as being like an old union boy, didn't he? And like representing the old unions, and they're all unionized, aren't they? All those American
and they
car
didn't even
companies.
They didn't even support him. Like they were definitely
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean?
That was a bit sad, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. We just talked about Elon Musk says that Tesla will be launching the full self-drive as a paid service in June 2025. The plan is that if you own a Tesla, you can put it into the fleet too, like almost like an Airbnb. But I'm sure in BC, if you had your Tesla in an Airbnb app like that, like an Uber, that the government would come along and decide that they need to take your car away and give it to somebody else.
Absolutely, no doubt that at the very least, they would slap a sort of license tax or something. Like the taxi companies would be upset about it, and then you would have to pay like a $2,000 registration fee or something.
I jest, but it's I don't know if it is that funny because it's kind of true, right? So we got a couple of memes today, and the first one is from our friend Ruby Dalla. She's put this one out there, and she's we can play this one. That's good. Ruby Dalla may be Canada's Elon Musk, coming up with memes.
She is a meme herself in many ways, isn't she? So
she may well be. I mean, if nothing else, she's entertaining, right? I'd rather have her as entertaining as something as where we keep putting Canadians at risk, where they're scared to you can't make their rent or can't make their mortgage payment. At least with her, you could have a laugh.
I think the funniest thing about her is that she's a liberal, and she's kind of she represents. She almost seems to be like an anti-liberal. Like all of her policies are like against the Liberal Party, and that's what makes
Well,
her a meme, I think.
Elon Musk was a Democrat as well.
Indeed, I suppose that is true. Yeah, and all the rest of them, Tulsi and RFK.
RFK having a tough time getting confirmed. He's getting screamed at quite a bit there, because he wants to make, like I think the obesity rate in the United States is like 1 in 10 people has obesity, and a lot of it is food induced. And if they could just lose weight, it would reverse. Like the food industry definitely fighting hard, and the pharmaceutical industry definitely fighting hard to make sure that he doesn't make it to get confirmed. I mean, again, eating healthy seems to be like the smart thing to do, and again, I live that every day. After losing 50 plus pounds and keeping off for 7 years, just by eating whole foods and eating better, right?
Yeah. Well, I think they're not. They're obviously not saying that they oppose him because of his ideas about food. They want to concentrate on. It's primarily vaccines, isn't it? What he said in the past about vaccines, because he's, he's not like anti-vax or whatever term you want to use per se, but he's very skeptical. He's vaccine skeptical, isn't he? And he sort of wants to raise the alarm about a lot of side effects that attached to certain vaccines. That's my reading of him anyway. But that's enough to antagonize a lot of people.
And for some reason, her name escapes my mind, but it'll probably come to me in a second. I'm sure you have it too. The senator that is like their Elizabeth May or whatever.
Elizabeth Warren.
Elizabeth Warren, yes. She definitely was, wanting him not to sue the pharmaceutical companies, wanted him to guarantee that he wouldn't sue the pharmaceutical companies. And he said, I definitely will not guarantee I will not sue the pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah, well, they have a very privileged position, don't they, in America? Not just because they're so rich, but also because they basically say, oh, we can't really invest in this life-saving technology because we're too scared that we'll be sued. So we're just not going to do it. So usually what happens is the government just bends and says, all right, then we'll exempt you from any sort of liability. But obviously Kennedy really doesn't like that idea.
Yeah, she's number one on the list there, according to the list they just published, that on donations from pharmaceutical companies. So she definitely is getting some money from them. So.
Well, they're just completely they're involved in everything. The pharmaceutical companies, aren't they? They lobby like mad, but they also spend huge amounts of money on the media, and they represent quite a large chunk of revenues for a lot of media. So they have a certain amount of power over the mainstream media too.
Yeah, and then here's some Whole Foods, and this is the best meme I've seen in a while. Impress her with something expensive,
That's primarily an American thing, isn't it? Where they're freaking out about egg prices, but I mean, it's like that all the time in Canada. Get yourself over to Canada, Americans.
The avian flu, a lot of chickens, like a lack of chickens right now. But yeah, I eat a lot of eggs. I mean, that's part of my diet. I eat 4 to 6 eggs a day. They used to tell you that you shouldn't eat eggs because of high cholesterol. Again, tell you to eat some sugar cereal, like wheat and sugar. Wasn't it the Frosted Flakes there said that when Canadians are suffering from high prices, why not consider cereal for dinner? Basically.
Oh yeah, who was that? It was the head of what's that company called again? Kellogg's. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, Frosted Flakes, and there's Tony the Tiger in the other room there, whipping up a batch of sugar and feeding it to your kids, right?
Yeah, terrible. I think the Canadian version of this meme, though, would probably be spinach or something like that, wouldn't it? Or tomatoes, something that in Canada costs. Or broccoli, actually. Broccoli's insanely expensive.
The Canadian version might be just a bag of groceries because everything.
Yeah. You know what I mean? A small bag of groceries.
And maybe a liter of gasoline.
Yeah, something like that. Or even a plane ticket to another city in Canada. That would be a good one to have. That.
I mean, maybe no different than what they said in COVID. Like, you can, instead of going and like meeting your partner that you're trying to date, you just do Zoom meetings, right? So you don't want to really have any contact anyway.
That's safer. Yeah, for sure.
Much safer and cheaper, I guess. Anyway.
Yeah.
I'm all dressed up today because I'm going to the AI summit. I don't know nobody's asked because I usually get flack for what I wear. So today I dressed up. So if you liked what I'm wearing today and you want to see that more often, then hey, like to hear some feedback. Or I used to wear a ball cap all the time. Nobody liked that though. So and the glasses, been attacked for the glasses a few times, grandma glasses and stuff like that. So there you go. And Ian, that's why he hides. We just have a picture of Ian there. He's scared of being attacked. So.
I'm just hideously disfigured. That's the real reason. I'm like Beauty and the Beast man. That's the real reason.
I think you're like Mick Jagger. There you go.
Yeah, well, he's pretty funny looking, isn't he? So
there you go. Again, we ask that you follow us on TikTok, follow us on X, follow us on LinkedIn, even follow us on. Again, go to the website on a regular basis, kelownanow.com. We have a newsletter that we send out 365 days a year, and it comes to your inbox at 7 a.m. We update the website all the time, though, so you can come and check that on a regular basis. Yeah, lots of ways to watch the stuff we do, but we do this show every weekday, Monday through Friday, around 9 a.m., 9 to 9:30. I think that's kind of where we shoot for, we start at, right? Depending on what, because we do a lot of live streams here. So again, if we could have our Facebook back and our Instagram back, if you're listening, Ruby, Christia, Mark, I can't remember the other guys that are running. It'd be interesting to see who's left. Pierre.
yeah.
Jagmeet, if you want, and Jagmeet, if you want to say something ridiculous, maybe you can say something ridiculous about Bill C-18. That'd be helpful. Because he did ask about us, because we did send some stuff. One of his people reached out to us and said, what's going on? And they wanted to know. We sent him all the stuff that we have, including all the articles that were written about us and all that kind of stuff. And then what we get back?
Tumbleweed.
Exactly what nothing. Silent. It's not even a go, whatever, just nothing. So there you go. So that said,
yeah.
Anything else you want to say before we close it off for the day?
No, I think as usual, we've been all over the world. All the subjects of importance. I think we've done our duty.
Yeah, and Ruby, if you're listening, we'd love to do an interview. Mark, if you're listening, Christia, we'd love to do an interview, and the other.
Christia is a long-time fan, isn't she? So I'm sure she'll be hearing this.
Christia is a long-time fan. I'm sure she is. Yeah. Okay. With that said, we do thank you for watching Kelowna Now.
We don't just report the news. We live here too. We're your neighbors, bringing you stories that matter to all of us. No government funding, no outside influence. Kelowna Now, local, independent. News you can trust.